Welcome in. It is the Northside Baseball Podcast. He is Jason Ross. I'm Mitch Woodmeyer, talking anything and everything Chicago Cubs baseball. The time has arrived where it is free agency. No, major moves yet in terms of that, but we have some things to discuss today. Jason, always great to have you along. Always great to catch up, as we're going to plan on doing, I think, every couple of weeks during the offseason. Or, of course, if the Cubs make a big splash in free agency, we should have something pretty immediate posted for the Northside Baseball Podcast. And as always, however you get the podcast, always appreciate you tuning in. So we've got a couple of bullet points today. I think we got to start with Shota Imanaga. He accepted the Cubs' $22 million qualifying offer. I'm fine with it. I'm not up in arms. I'm not overjoyed. I'm kind of right in the middle because I like Shota Imanaga. I certainly like the clubhouse presence, Shota Imanaga, and I've kind of accepted it to a point, Jason, where I'm like, if Shota is your number one or number two in your rotation, I'm a little iffy about how things look.
Yeah.
If the Cubs can go out and get a Dylan Cease and you pair him at the top of your rotation with a Cade Horton, and then Shota's your 3 or your 4, I think that picture is a lot easier for people to digest and accept. So I think a lot of this with Shota, it might sound odd for me to put it this way, Jason, but how I view them bringing back Shota, I can't come to a full conclusion until I see how else they approach this offseason with the rotation, because if they go into it next year and he's your 2, I'm going to be like, I'm not overly comfortable with that. If he's your 3-4 because you made a splash in free agency, I'd be very, very pleased with that route if the Cubs choose to do that. Where are you at with Shota, the qualifying offer, and him staying put in Chicago?
I think for Shota, it's probably the right decision. I don't think that being attached with a qualifying offer, he was going to find a lot of great options out there on the market. It's brutal. I mean, we saw a good pitcher like Nick Pivetta get kind of hampered by it last offseason. He didn't sign until late in the offseason when the qualifying offer went away. And I like Shota as a person, and I wouldn't want to see that kind of wait for him have to happen. But with the way that the end of his season went, I mean, what team is offering him 3 years right now? I think that's probably, in a weird place for him. From a Cubs perspective, I think if the Cubs didn't want him, they wouldn't have offered a qualifying offer. So I think you can look at it from a Cubs perspective of this probably is fine with them. They're probably okay with it. If they absolutely didn't want him to take it, they would never offered it to him. I think when you offered it to him, you had to expect that he was probably going to take it. It was probably the right decision on his part. The way it kind of affects the Cubs offseason is, if we're looking at FanGraphs roster resource right now, this kind of puts them at an estimated payroll of 179, I believe, is what we're sitting at right now. And that is, I do believe, before the 22 million on there. So it's going to kind of put it kind of up in that like 190 range on where they're going to be at on roster resource. Some of that money is obviously going to come off. No, actually, I take it back. It's on there. So they're sitting at 179 million right now in roster resource, puts them about 180. Last year, they were, I think, 215. So they're about, I think, 35 million short of where they were last year. I think had Shota left, you probably got a little bit more excited about an MI or a Cease coming through. The money would have really been there to do some cool stuff there. With Shota kind of accepting it, I think maybe your biggest starting pitcher comes via trade, like a Mackenzie Gore, Edward Cabrera, something like that. That's going to come in a little bit cheaper.
Ryan, maybe.
Yeah, Joe Ryan, somebody like that who's going to be a little bit cheaper. So maybe we probably shift. I think with the messaging that's out there, the Cubs are going to bring in a good pitcher somewhere. And then, I think if I were Jameson Taillon, I would maybe be a little concerned about being on the roster next year. He does have a limited no trade clause, 10 teams, but he's on his last year of his deal. He's a good pitcher at $16 million, that he's at 18 million. Sorry. He's on 18 million right now, 17 million annual average. But 18 million for a team next year, 1 year deal. It's going to be that's pretty good value. And you figure the Cubs were able to move Cody Bellinger last year to kind of switch things around. And if you're looking at those 1 year deals, right now going into next offseason, the Cubs kind of like lose their whole roster. And I know there are some people who are out there and say, well, that's what they want to do. They're worried about the lockout. I don't think that the Cubs goal is to basically go into 2027 with their entire roster becoming a free agent. It's impossible to build an entire team in 1 year. I don't think that's their goal. How do you shift that now that Shota Imanaga is a 1 year deal as well? Well, you trade a 1 year deal away and then you sign somebody. So, I think that if you wanted the Cubs to bring in one good pitcher via free agency and one via trade, the kind of way that this happens is that Jameson Taillon is dealt to a pitching needy team, like the Atlanta Braves, who could use some depth pitching and might want like a 1 year deal type of a thing. Could be a team that Taillon would be willing to go to. It's just a kind of an example I was thinking of.
Yeah.
And then you replace his 18 million with Michael King's 20 million. We've seen him connected to the Cubs multiple times on like a 4-year contract. And then you trade for Edward Cabrera and you go into next season with a rotation that looks like Edward Cabrera, Cade Horton, Michael King as your 1, 2, 3, Shota as your 4. And then you go into the season maybe with like Javier Assad as your 5, and then you have Matthew Boyd in there. I forgot about Boyd. And then Justin Steele comes in to add to your reinforcements. You've got maybe Javier Assad, Jordan Wicks, Ben Brown as that next group early, and then Jackson Wiggins late. And then if you're saying, well, hey, that's 6 guys, the Cubs are going to use pitchers next year. Guys get hurt. I don't think it matters. And you probably want to go in with that kind of depth. So you could kind of replace that. You're not really adding a lot to your salary, and then you have plenty of money elsewhere. But I think the Shota math kind of changes that. In terms of a pitcher, I like Shota Imanaga. He's a good pitcher.
Yeah.
I know the end of the season was kind of rough. He really struggled with locating the splitter. His arm slot got messed up. If the Cubs didn't think that they couldn't fix him a little bit, they wouldn't have offered a qualifying offer. They have to feel like there's some hope that they can get him back to kind of be the guy that he was. And I think if Shota Imanaga is in the middle of your rotation, you're probably doing a pretty good job in terms of value. So
Yeah.
I'm okay with it. I don't love it. I don't hate it. I don't think the Cubs love it or hate it. I think it was just something that they're willing to do. And there's kind of a belief that there's really no bad thing as a 1-year contract. If it doesn't work out, you let him walk at the end of the year. If it does work out, hey, great. He's probably going to pitch better than worth a 1-year, $22 million contract.
100%. One thing on the staff, and then I have a follow-up question about Shota for you. If I go like super glass half full, Jason, but also within the realm of possibilities, right? Like I'm not saying something that's like so far-fetched. It's like, why are we even bringing this up? But if I go super glass half full and I say, it's not a foregone conclusion it happens, but let's say the Cubs add a top of the rotation arm, you say via trade like a Cabrera or a Gore, and then I say, well, you pair that with Cade Horton, who's coming off that rookie year, and if he adds on in his second year, awesome. And then if I say, what if Justin Steele looks like some form close to the Justin Steele we saw before the injury, and then all of a sudden Shota's your 4 and Boyd could be your 5. All of a sudden I'm looking at a rotation and I'm like, this is terrifying for an opposition to go up against these guys. If they go and they get a Joe Ryan, a Gore, or a Cabrera, or if they go free agency, I know you mentioned King as an option. And I'm looking at that at the top with Cade Horton. And if Justin Steele looks like the guy we saw before the injury a couple years ago, and then Shota's your 4, Boyd's your 5, I would love. That's almost like a dream scenario to me. If you have Shota Imanaga as your 4 and Boyd coming off the year he had as your 5, like would be incredible. But you bring up the point that at some point there's an odd man out, and it could end up being someone like a Jameson Taillon. Or I shouldn't even say someone like, it could end up being Jameson Taillon, because we know Colin Ray's coming back, and he's kind of that. He's like I think of him as like a dual threat quarterback, a true dual threat. Like he can run as much as he can throw. Like Colin Ray can start as much as he could be in your bullpen. If you have injuries in your rotation, he's just fine slotting in at the back end and giving you 5 innings every 5th day. And he can do that just fine for a prolonged period of time. So I'm super fascinated now that they've added Shota back to the equation for 2026. If they go out and make a splash move at the top of the rotation, I will be very, very pleased with how things come together in that department. My question for you, Jason, because I know you dive into this stuff more frequently than I do, Shota's struggles, especially the home run ball, and especially his struggles in the first inning of games this year, really under the magnifying glass, and things that we didn't necessarily see in his first year with the Cubs. You mentioned, I think you said his slot position. I was wondering, was he like patterning things to a way where like teams just caught on? Was he doing anything where it was like, oh, teams just kind of caught on to the gist of how he was approaching his starts? Or do you think it was a couple of the things you mentioned, or could it be both things combined? Because the struggles were like they didn't even want to have him start a playoff game and go out in the first inning. They would use an opener and then have Shota come out. That's how bad the first inning problems and the home run problems kind of plagued him throughout the year, especially in that second half. And I was just curious if you thought some of it was how he's patterning pitches, kind of sequencing things, or if you just think it was arm slot.
Split finger, man, that's the problem. So
Okay.
if we look at his numbers last year, everybody's throwing a fit about his fastball, right? He can't throw that slow of a fastball and give up that many home runs. He gave up 2 more home runs on the fastball this year than he did last year. So it's not the fastball. Fastball was, I know he missed some time, so this is a little bit skewed, but he gave up 24 home runs this year on the fastball. He gave up 22 last year on the fastball. It's not like it was really the fastball. If we look at his ex-WOBA against the fastball, it was worse than it was last year, but it wasn't like it's not like crazy crazy bad. Where things changed was the split finger. So last year's split finger, he gave up 4 home runs on it in 730 pitches. Right, that's 730 pitches. 797. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong one. 797 pitches last year. He gave up 4 home runs. He had an ex-WOBA, so that's an expected WOBA of 238 on that pitch. That is really good. That is a pitch guys aren't hitting. This year, he threw 683 split fingers. That's less split fingers than he did last year. He doubled the home run rate because he gave up 7 on the split finger, and his ex-WOBA on the pitch was his ex-WOBA on the pitch jumped up to a 263 on that. And the big thing was the slugging on it. It went from a 281 to a 368. He jumped up 100 points on the slugging on that pitch. And when you look at where the split finger sits on StatCast, and you can't see this right now because I'm just kind of looking at it, but it was much more grouped in that lower away. So if I was looking at it from a right-handed hitter, that split finger last year was sitting directly on that outside corner of the plate. He effectively uses it as almost like kind of a changeup to an offhanded hitter. So when we say offhanded hitter, what we mean is like lefty to righty, righty to lefty. So as a lefty, he's throwing it on that outer pitch to a right-handed, kind of using it as like a changeup, as you would see like Cade Horton uses changeup to lefties. This year, it caught so much more of the plate. It was catching so much more of the plate. And we could see that with his fastball too. And actually, I think I underplayed his ex-WOBA on the fastball. I looked at the wrong number. It was 316 to 375. So that did jump. And yeah, there were a lot of home runs there. But it really wasn't as I really think that the splitter is kind of the issue. And I almost kind of wonder if some of that fastball issue is also because the splitter just wasn't, it kind of got taken away from him. And if you're a 2-pitch vertical pitcher and you're not really hitting that low end on the splitter, that is such an effective pitch for him. That fastball struggled. And yeah, there was a little bit of velocity drop, especially when he came back after an injury. So like if you want the optimistic view on Shota on how to fix him, I think the optimistic view looks at it from he was hurt, arm slot got weird. If you feel like he's healthy and you feel like you get the arm slot kind of up a little bit, I think it just dropped just a little bit too much last year. Then yeah, I don't think like early season 2024 Shota is really what we should expect. I mean, he was so unbelievable when he came here and he started, and I don't think that that's maybe a fair kind of expectation for what we should think Shota is going to be, but I think maybe second half of the year Shota Imanaga last year, or his first year, where he kind of I think he kind of settled in a little bit more. I think that's probably more what to look for. So that would be what I would guess is kind of like your optimistic view. Somebody who really sits in as like a good 3, but he's really your 4th best pitcher or your 5th best pitcher. And if you're sitting at Shota, who is a good 3 and your 4th or 5th best pitcher, you probably got a pretty good rotation going.
Agreed. Well said. Northside Baseball Podcast. He is Jason Ross. I'm Mitch Woodmeyer, catching up on everything Chicago Cubs baseball. Shota accepts the 1-year qualifying offer, and I'm not sure if you saw the graphic, but within that tweet when the Cubs put out the graphic that Shota accepted the qualifying offer, Jason, they also listed a couple other roster moves. So the 40-man now stands at 32 as the Cubs selected Left-handed pitcher Riley Martin, infielder Pedro Ramirez, and infielder James Triantos. I defer to you as our resident minor league aficionado. I will say, I'm curious on your thoughts on those three additions, and I will note the one name that I tracked throughout the year because you brought it up frequently for what he was doing in the minors was Triantos. So I found that to be a fascinating ad when I saw the Cubs talk about some or send the graphic out about those roster moves. What'd you make of them?
I think those were the right moves. There wasn't an obvious keep candidate in the minor leagues for the Cubs this year. There were a handful of names that you could maybe make an argument to get kept, and I'll talk about a few of those in a moment. But there wasn't like a top 100 prospect or like some like can't miss guy that you're like, oh, this guy has to be kept. What the Cubs had was a group of players who you could maybe keep, you could maybe not keep. And the Cubs are in an interesting position where their 40-man roster is pretty thin right now. We've talked about roster crunch. It's kind of been maybe a fun buzzword that we've seen over the course of the last few years. It's like, how are the Cubs going to make sure that they add Matt Mervis so he doesn't get picked? And how do we handle the roster crunch? And there's so many good guys on the 40. Well, with as many free agents as the Cubs have, and basically their bullpen gone right now. The Cubs have lots of 40-man positions, and the three they picked were Pedro Ramirez, who has had he looks like a top 15 prospect organizationally right now. If the glove is good enough, the contact is pretty good. I don't necessarily see a starting player at the next level, but I do think he can be an organizational piece for a major league team. Maybe he's a second division starter. When we say second division starter, we're talking about somebody who probably isn't starting for a contending team, but is maybe, for most years, and this is no shade to him, like a Pittsburgh Pirates starting second baseman type of a player. They're not really going to be thought of as contending for the National League Central very often, but he could still be a useful player for a team like that. So I don't necessarily see him as a starter, but I think that there's enough bat there if the glove is decent enough at the next level that he's an organizational player. He can play Major League Baseball. You've got Riley Martin, who's one of my favorite stories, and I've talked about him on this podcast before. He's 27, so he's a little older, but he's got a great curveball. He reminds me of, in the vein of like a Drew Pomeranz or a Caleb Thielbar, where he's big loopy curveball. Fastball sits pretty decent. He does get a little wild sometimes, so if you can kind of tone that in, I think there's a chance he can be a pretty decent lefty at the major league level, and you don't want to lose that. Lefty depth is important. So you had those two, and then James Triantos, as you already brought up. He's a jack of all trades, and I think his prospect star has kind of fallen. There was some time where he was getting some top 100 love. Probably isn't that, but he's probably I wouldn't be surprised if he becomes, as 2026 goes, the John Birdie of the bench type, but he actually plays a little bit. He's capable at a lot of positions. He's very fast on the base paths. He's got good. He's shown some good power at times, but he doesn't show great like exit velocity. He's got a lot of contact. He's got a really strong arm, but he's never really settled in one position. So I think he's going to be capable of playing decent enough second base, third base, left field, center field, right field if you really wanted him to. Maybe not so much right field, but his arm's pretty good. So, size-wise, he's not really a right fielder, but he's probably capable of handling it. So you keep those three. And then there's a few names that didn't get selected who I think we could lose. And to lose a player who's not on the 40, there will be the Rule 5 draft. It'll be at the very tail end of the winter meetings in December. So we're just a few weeks away from that. But a team has to roster that player for at least 90 days on the active roster and to keep them. If for any reason a player doesn't get kept for those 90 days, they get returned to their regular player. Gage Workman was a player the Cubs selected in the Rule 5 draft last year from Detroit out of their Double-A. Didn't work out with the Cubs. They sent him back, and he was gone. I take it back. I think they traded him to the White Sox.
White Sox. I was going to say.
Yeah, it was the White Sox. That's what it was.
Yeah.
But if the Cubs didn't want him, they could have, if they designate him for assignment, he goes back to his host team. So, a few names that we could potentially lose. Connor Noland is a pitcher in Iowa. I don't think he's great, but like organizational depth, he's there. I think he'll make a major league start in his career. I would say probably 60-40. He makes at least one major league start, which is better than 98% of minor league players. I don't think he's special, but he's kitchen sink guy. He throws, low 90s, throws a lot of strikes. He could get a look with a couple major league teams and parlay that into a few years in the majors. He's a guy who I think could get selected. If you're a team who's not looking to contend next year, the Colorado Rockies, could be a team like that who just needs some pitching. They could nab him. He had a pretty good season down in Iowa. A couple other guys. Grant Kipp is a 25-year-old in Double-A, but he's got a really good slider. I wouldn't be shocked if a team tried to sneak him on a roster for the entire year as a reliever. He's a guy who could maybe sneak through. Brandon Birdsell is a starting pitcher that I thought was actually on the.
That's a name you brought up frequently too on the podcast.
Yeah, he did not get selected, but he also had Tommy John surgery. So a team's going to have to basically roster them all offseason. There's no 60-day injured list over the offseason. They'd have to roster him on the 40-man all offseason, and then transfer him to a 60-day later just to keep him for the year. And then he'd have to spend 90 days active the next year. I don't think a team's going to do that. So especially with the Tommy John prospect and who's not like a top guy sitting around. So I don't think that the Cubs are probably worried about losing him, which is good. I want to keep Brandon Birdsell around. I think he's an interesting arm. He's had a lot of arm injuries down the past, but if you can get him back, there's a major league pitcher there. So those are kind of the names that you could maybe hear selected. And then there's always the minor league portion of the draft. That's when you get real into the prospect dork weeds, and we don't need to do that right now. But yeah, I think they picked the guys that I expected they picked. I think Pedro Ramirez is probably the most obvious one with the season that he's had and where he's at. You could probably shove him on a bench and you wouldn't notice it and be able to keep him. And then, I like Riley Martin. I've talked about Riley Martin before. I think if I was a team at the deadline and I was dealing with the Cubs, Riley Martin would have been near the top of my throw-in list. I think he's interesting and his curveball is good enough to stick. So yeah, I think it kind of checked out. We'll see if where those guys go. That's not necessarily a guarantee that they're going to make major leagues. Caleb Killian was a guy who spent plenty of time on our roster, and while he made a small appearance at the majors, didn't really work out for him. And Matt Mervis was another guy. So just because you get selected doesn't mean you'll necessarily play. But yeah, sitting at 32 is good. I think that number will probably be down to 31 in the next few days when the Cubs decide not to tender Reese McGuire a contract. They may tender him a contract, but I think catching depth is probably a little bit too much to carry him around for $1 million.
Yeah, man. I don't want to dive into it, but a name you brought up twice there was Mervis. I just remember that dude was shredding in the minors, and then whenever he would get called up to the Cubs, it was just nothing. He just couldn't fully piece it together. But in the minors, you'd look at his numbers and his highlights and be like, holy crap, this dude is hammering pitching. And then he gets called up and just nothing.
I thought he was going to be a thing for a while, and then they started to give us AAA StatCast data. And once I got AAA StatCast data, I immediately figured out why the Cubs wouldn't call him up. He couldn't. And it's those things where when you look at the line, you're like, that guy's got it. He's crushing everything. All of his numbers look good. And then you looked at his swing chart and you'd look at it and he couldn't hit any breaking balls all that well. He could really only hit pitches squared up down the middle, and he didn't have good bat coverage. And major league pitchers are going to kill you on that if you can't do that. So it's interesting to see those kinds of things. I remember being super upset that they had Eric Hosmer, Trey Mancini. They wouldn't just put him on the opening day roster. And I'm not going to defend the choice of maybe kind of cheaping out at first base at any point. But at the other end, I think the Cubs probably knew better than a lot of us what they didn't have in Matt Mervis, sadly.
Yeah. Finish up an old friends alert, plural. Christopher Morel, Luis Vasquez. What name am I missing? Vasquez, Morel.
Alexander Canario.
Canario. Thank you.
Yeah.
All DFA'd. I guess it depends when you watch this. We're recording on Wednesday evening, but all were DFA'd on Tuesday. I loved Christopher Morel. Not that I thought he would be a superstar. I just loved the guy, the player, the teammate. He seemed he is such a good dude. He seems like it. I didn't think the fall from grace would be as steep as it's been for him. And you
Mm-mm.
kind of look at the domino effect. You remember they trade Christopher Morel to Tampa Bay a couple of years ago to get Paredes, and then use Paredes as one of the pieces to bring in Kyle Tucker from Houston. So there you can kind of loop the Morel name all the way back to the Kyle Tucker trade because it was
Mm-hmm.
kind of that chain of command. Was Morel the most surprising name of the three that you saw get DFA'd? And man, it just kind of stinks to see that, because I've always been one, like, I don't want these former Cubs who kind of get their first go around in Chicago, or maybe their second go around, like their second stop is with Chicago. I never want to see him go somewhere else and end up DFA'd in the offseason. So
No.
kind of sucked to see that news. For me, Morel was the most notable name, I guess, just from a
Yeah.
recognition standpoint. But like, he was struggling. He was struggling with the Rays mightily, and I think they tried him in the outfield. Third. They tried him at a couple of different spots, and yeah, it just kind of stunk. And definitely noteworthy to do an old friends alert. So curious what your thoughts were on those three names.
Name noteworthy, yeah. Morel's noteworthy in terms of obviousness. He actually was pretty obvious to get DFA'd when you really think about it. We all have 2023 Christopher Morel kind of in our head when he was a 120 WRC plus player. He's coming into the winter. We're hoping he can play third base. We're all very excited about what we can maybe get out of Christopher Morel in those moments. And then you dive into his 2024 numbers and his 2025 numbers. And over the last 916 plate appearances, he did hit 32 home runs, which is a good amount of home runs, but he did so with a 204 batting average, a 288 on base percentage, a 363 slugging percentage. His WRC plus was down to 84 over that time. So he was 16% worse than league average. He's so bad defensively that he was worth negative 1.1 FWAR. So you can't be a DH who doesn't have the H. And that's kind of what Morel had turned into. And when you really think about it from an organizational standpoint, it'd be one thing if Christopher Morel had been designated for an assignment from a team like the Colorado Rockies or the Los Angeles Angels or the Washington Nationals, where you'd look at it and go, developmentally, these are just teams that kind of struggle. He got DFA'd from the Tampa Bay Rays. This is a team who, if you're going to trust a team to develop a young player pretty well, the Rays have a pretty good history of that. And he's still 16% worse than league average and not hitting as a DH. And you can't keep that around. That just is what it is. Luis Vasquez and Alexander Canario, I think, are interesting names from the fact that in the offseason, there were contingency of Cubs fans who were upset that the Cubs DFA'd them to begin with. They were upset. They were mad that they let him go for nothing. And one of the things I tried to argue at those points is, listen, they weren't top prospects anymore. These were guys that the Cubs knew something about. And when you look at it a year later, like, I always thought Luis Vasquez maybe had a glove and there was a potential, like, kind of like Jose Iglesias light, where he hit a lot of singles and played enough glove to stay in the league. That still might happen, but like, neither of them were star players. Alexander Canario, it's been years since he's been a really good prospect. And I know we got him for Chris Bryant and we wanted him to be really good. And there was that one year where it really looked like it turned the corner. And then he had the awful ankle and shoulder injury. And he just never came back from it. His AAA numbers suggested that his contact rates were just too poor to ever really make up for it. And sadly, he got designated from assignment. And when that happens, I think it's a good reminder that, we can't fall in love with these guys like that. He got designated from assignment from the Pirates. If the Pirates can't find like many more plate appearances or giving you a chance, and then I don't know what organization's really going to find the time. Yeah, it's tough sledding. And here's the thing is that, bad news for everybody out there. There's probably going to be a few names this year that get DFA'd at some point or lost, or they're going to be traded for nothing. And we're going to see that same thing pop up. And, Luis Arias was another pitcher who the Cubs had. Was it Luis Arias? Oh no, who was it? Oh gosh, he got picked up by the Yankees, and names eluding me right now. Was another player that I know fans were upset about losing. And here's the thing. There are going to be a couple names that we're going to lose. Good reminder, Vasquez, Canario, Luis Vasquez.
Michael Arias.
Michael Arias. That's who it was. I knew it was an Arias. But these Nelson Velasquez, that's what I was thinking. Nelson Velasquez with the Royals a few years ago. People get kind of fired up on these like fringy prospects when the Cubs don't really give them a chance, and then they get traded somewhere else and they get really upset or they get DFA'd, and then you give it 2 years and you look back, Nelson Velasquez hasn't been anything. Alexander Canario, it doesn't look like he's anything. Luis Vasquez isn't much. Michael Arias, I do not believe had a good season at all. I'm just going to go double check and just make sure that it stayed that way. Yeah, it was the same stuff. He walked everybody and their mother, and the 2.57 ERA looks pretty good in AA until you realize that over the course of that time he walked 15.6% of hitters, and those are AA hitters. He doesn't really look like a major league future player. So I think those guys are great cautionary stories. We all love these prospects. We want them to do really good. Sadly, whoever your favorite prospect is right now is a far more likelihood of failing than there ever are in succeeding. Ivan Brettauer was a guy I talked a lot about this year. He got traded to Cleveland was it Cleveland? I think it was Cleveland, or he got traded one of the deals over the offseason in the deadline, and he's gone. And you know what? He's probably just not going to turn into anything, and he wasn't going to turn anything probably with the Cubs. And that's no shame on these guys, no shade against these guys. It is so hard to become a Major League Baseball player. I wish I was a Major League Baseball player. I played in a rec league. So it's super hard. It's just really hard. So it's not worth getting upset when these guys aren't kept or aren't traded for a lot or just DFA'd, and there'll probably be a few of them this year, and it's just cautionary stories. So yeah, I wish them the best. I hope all three of them can latch on somewhere and can make it. None of them are too old. It wouldn't be crazy to hear from Christopher Morel again. But
yeah, he's the one out of three where it's like there's a lot of major league experience compared to the other two, right? Where it's like he maybe catches on somewhere else and gets an opportunity, whether that's in like a platoon role or who knows.
He's 84 WRC plus over his last 900 plate appearances as a designated hitter type. It's gonna be tough for him.
Yeah.
I hope it's a mechanical thing. His strikeout rate went through the roof last year. He struck out 35% of the time. He was always somebody who struck out a lot in the minors. He's 26, so right organization, right time, right coach. It's not impossible, but I would be surprised if any of them really become much of anything. But I hope I'm wrong. I want every one of these guys to do well wherever they go.
Morel was always a guy too. Like if he was at the hot corner, ground balls hit to him, I'm yelling TV like, "Take your time, take your time, take your time," because he would fire off some missiles that would
had a one hop an arm. But
yeah, just a little wild with the accuracy sometimes. And I'd always be saying to the TVJs like, relax, take your time, take your time.
And he never would.
No, never would.
He's an enigma because he's so athletic.
Yes,
he is so athletic. He had great arm. He was able to move. He could move really well. And then you hit him a ground ball, and it was like you never knew what you were going to get. It's crazy when you remind yourself that like you can be a freak athlete and not be able to field a ground ball, because it's like that's in your head. You kind of are like, well, if he's a freak athlete, like he hit the ball to him, he can throw it to first base. And it reminds us how hard this game is. Baseball's a hard game.
Yes. Anything else you want to wrap up on?
No, I'm excited to get into the off season. We've seen a couple of moves. Josh Naylor to Seattle was kind of our big one. Yeah, well deserved. Good for him. He turned into a base stealing demon, which is crazy. Never didn't have that one on my bingo card. But good for him. I think he took a little less money for a no trade clause and to stay in Seattle. So you always, you love to see a guy who likes where he's playing. So good for him. And Grayson Rodriguez trade yesterday for Taylor Ward. There had been some talk that the Cubs may be interested in Joe Adell from
I saw that
from Los Angeles. He was actually.
I'm good. I mean, I
would like him. I would have been a big Joe Adell guy if the Cubs would have got him. I think if you get a player out of the Los Angeles Angels organization, you always have to assume that there's some juice to squeeze, because I don't know if they
What
know
they're
what they're
doing.
doing. Nope.
Yeah.
Nope. Which is why if I was Grayson Rodriguez right now, I'd be concerned. I know a lot of people were kind of big on that. Like, how did the Orioles trade Grayson Rodriguez, former top pitching prospect, 4 years of control for 1 year of Taylor Ward? Well, I think that probably tells you two things. One, it probably tells you how bad his arm is. And two, if the Los Angeles Angels are the team that you had to trade him to, that probably also says, why did the other 31 teams not?
Yeah.
And that probably lets you know about where he's at. But I'm excited to get into it. I think I think that we're probably in for, I think, an exciting offseason, Major League Baseball wide. I think it'll be really good. And I do think that the Cubs are saying the things that if you were hoping for a good offseason, they're saying them. They keep talking about pitching. That's their biggest issue is pitching. And so I do think that we're probably in for some changes in the pitching staff. And, Sharma and Mooney from The Athletic have been kind of beating the drum that the Cubs are serious about maybe looking at that top end of the market. So I'm hoping that we have something exciting to talk about in the next couple of weeks. And at the very least, maybe some rumors and some interesting things.
He is Jason Ross. I'm Mitch Widmeyer. This has been the Northside Baseball Podcast. We'll be bopping in and out throughout the offseason. Hopefully, next time we hop on, it's because, hey, look what the Cubs just did. It's a trade or signing that's very noteworthy. We'll have to see. But yeah, he's Jason Ross. I'm Mitch Widmeyer. This has been the Northside Baseball Podcast.